All right. Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us tonight on this lovely Monday evening. My name is Matt. I'm one of the co-owners of Mysterious Galaxy. And tonight I am joined by Anne Hillerman. How are you doing, Anne?
Hi, fine. Thank you for having me tonight.
Oh, thank you for joining us. I think you're what, an hour ahead,
Right.
maybe? Yeah.
Yeah, right. It's a little after 8 here.
Yeah. The late night ones are tough, and we appreciate you joining us. Let's see. Anne is the best-selling author of the Leaphorn, Chee Manuelito series. The Sacred Bridge is the seventh novel in that series, and it is a series that your dad Tony originally started, right?
Right.
And as we alluded to, she is not in California. She's in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and you are currently at work on your next novel.
Right. As soon as I finish talking, I'm going to get back to work.
Well, you got to get through all the fun press stuff and all the bookstore events and the library events. You got to enjoy this book a little bit before you really dive into the next ones.
Oh, thank you. Okay, I'll do it.
I mean, you have to enjoy the fact that you hit number 6 on the New York Times bestseller. I think that is required for anyone who hits that list. Like, you deserve to have like a week or two to enjoy that.
Well, at least a day or two.
Yeah. Okay. Let's see. I'm going to give just a little run of show here. So if you haven't already picked up Anne's book, you can get it from the button down below. Signed book plates are available through us. And let's see. As some of you have already seen, we have a chat to the right. You can go ahead and talk about anything or respond to Anne. And if you have any particular questions, use the Ask a Question tab at the bottom of the screen and go ahead and put your questions there. And I will come on in like 30 minutes or so and ask those questions of Anne. So you got a little time. So don't stress. But I will pass it over to you and see you soon.
Thank you. Thanks, Matt. And thanks, everyone, for joining me here tonight. I'm just delighted to have a chance to talk about my new baby, The Sacred Bridge. The Sacred Bridge was released April 12th. It's the 7th book in the series that I guess I'd say my recreation or reinvigoration of a series that my father, Tony Hillerman, started back in 1970. So in a way, while this is my 7th book, it's also the 25th book in the Jim Chee, Joe Leaphorn, and now Bernadette Manuelito series. So tonight I wanted to talk to you about a few different things. First, I wanted to kind of mention how it happened that I made the switch from being a journalist and a nonfiction writer into writing novels. And then after that, I want to talk a little bit specifically about some of the things that inspired me to write The Sacred Bridge. I want to talk about the title because titles are often difficult for me. And this one, unfortunately, was no exception. And then I'm going to read you a couple of little excerpts from The Sacred Bridge. Not too long. I promise I'm not going to give away any big plot elements. And then I'll be glad to answer your questions. So if something comes to you while I'm talking, just jot it down, and then we'll pick it up at the end of this conversation. So my dad and I never, ever talked about my continuing the series. When I was growing up, when I was a teenager, my dad was a successful journalist, and he would often come home after a hard day at the newspaper. He worked at the main paper in Santa Fe, New Mexico, called The New Mexican. And he would come home, and he often would talk about the stories that he was working on. And he was also the editor there. So he would sometimes talk about the young reporters that he was mentoring. And his work really enlivened him, and he loved it. So when I was growing up, I always liked to write. And so it quickly came to me that being a reporter, a journalist, would be a very interesting job, that I would have a chance to make a living writing, not a big living, but enough to pay the rent and buy popsicles. And that also I would have a chance to meet so many interesting people. So I got a degree in journalism, and I worked on newspapers in New Mexico. I did magazine articles. And then what often happens when you're a journalist writing for a local paper is that someone who's doing, say, a travel guide will see your name and they'll think, oh, this person knows how to put a sentence together. So then they will contact you as a reporter and a writer and say, hey, we're doing a guide to La Jolla or San Diego or Santa Fe or Espanola, and would you be interested in writing for us? So I did several of those guidebooks, and with each one, I learned a little something. I got a little bit more confident about my ability to write more than, say, the 500 words that you write when you're writing for newspapers. So from there, I got an invitation to do a book about Santa Fe restaurants, because as part of my journalism job, I was a restaurant critic, which was a great job, really great job. So I did a book about Santa Fe restaurants. And then I was asked by this wonderful publisher in Utah, Gibbs Smith Publishing, if I would do a book about gardens in Santa Fe. And I loved that book. That was such a wonderful book. My late husband, Don Strell, did the photos. And as we were doing that book, Don and I realized that we really enjoyed working together. So we thought, gee, wouldn't it be fun to do a book with my father and to go to all the wonderful places in Navajo land that he had written about? Now, at this point in his life, my dad had segued from journalism to teaching journalism at the University of New Mexico. And as he was doing that, he had more time to write. So he wrote his first novels as a journalism instructor. And then after 5 or 6, he left teaching and then became a full-time writer. So at this point, Dad had written, I don't know, maybe 15 books. And I thought, and they took readers to all different beautiful places on the Navajo Nation. And often Jim Chee and Joe Leaphorn, Dad's 2 main detectives, would just have to pull off the highway because the sunset was so gorgeous, or the clouds from the developing storm were fabulous. And people often would say to Dad, I love your plots, but I love your scenic description. So it seemed to Don and me that there might be interest in doing photos of the real places that Jim Chee and Joe Leaphorn went to. And then I would write a little description about, how the place got its name and, some of the interesting things about it, the geology, the hydrology, the natural history. So when Don and I came up with this idea, I also thought, gosh, this will be a wonderful father-daughter bonding experience. Dad will be in the car with me, and when we go to Crown Point or Shiprock or Gallup or any of the places in his books, being there will stir up such wonderful memories for him of, what it was like the first time he was there and what inspired him to put it in whatever book it had been in. So I had this idea and I said to Dad, Don and I want to do this book. What do you think? He said, oh, I think that's a great idea. And we said, oh, well, why would you come with us? Driving, we'll spend, off and on, maybe a year driving through the Navajo Nation. And he looked at me and he said, well, honey, I'm in an age where I really love my afternoon naps. So why don't you and Don just go and take the pictures and then just come back and show them to me on the computer? I thought, well, okay. So that was what we did. Now, at the time that this book was called Tony Hillerman's Landscape, On the Road with Chee and Leaphorn. And at the time that Don and I had the idea for this book, I was not at all imagining that I would be writing fiction, and especially writing fiction that concerned the wonderful characters that my father had created. But right as we were finishing this book, my father died. So we wrapped up the loose ends. The book came out. And then the publisher, HarperCollins, said, we really like our writers to go on a little book tour. So they arranged for me to talk at bookstores like Mystery Galaxy, except this was before Zoom, or to talk at libraries, or to talk to women's groups or Rotary clubs. Anyway, I did a lot of talking about my book, and I was happy to do that. And I learned a lot about how to be a public speaker. But the other thing I learned that really surprised me was how deep and wide the affection was for those characters that my father had created. After I finished my talk, almost always someone in the audience would raise their hand, and that person would say, "So, did your dad have any more Jim Chee, Joe Leaphorn stories? Was there something at the publisher that, is about to come out, or something in his computer that could be dusted off, or something?" And I would have to say, "No, sorry, there wasn't. Dad really used it up before he died." And then there would be this awkward pause. And then the person would say, "Oh, I love those characters. I felt like they were part of my family. I'm going to miss them so much. I guess all I can do is reread the whole series." And honest to goodness, I must have heard this, 30 times. And every time I heard it, I thought, well, darn, I am missing my dad, but I'm also going to be missing Jim Chee and Joe Leaphorn. And it just didn't seem right that even though my dad could not write the stories, that the legacy of Jim Chee and Joe Leaphorn had to end. So as I'm giving these talks, I'm kind of thinking, oh, maybe I could try my hand at writing a mystery. So I knew I could never be Tony Hillerman, but Dad had a minor character who had always really appealed to me. And this was Bernadette Manuelito. And those of you who have read some of my dad's novels may have been introduced to Bernie as my dad imagined her. And she was a sweet, rather incompetent rookie cop. She's obviously head over heels in love with her boss, Jim Chee. When Jim gets hurt, she offers to be his chauffeur. When Jim needs coffee, she'll go out and get it. She's like, she's not, shall we say, a full-fledged go and get him police officer. She's more like an ingenue love interest. Well, I thought, this is not right. I thought it just doesn't seem right for the series to end with this character who has so much potential being trapped in this kind of sweet girlfriend role. I thought, even if nobody reads this book except me and my mom, I need to write a book where Bernadette Manuelito is not getting rescued, is not bringing anybody coffee unless she really wants to, where Bernie is the crime solver. Bernie is smart. Bernie has, by this point in Dad's series, she'd had some experience. So I thought, all right, I'm gonna see if I can write this book. So the first thing I did was talk to my mother. Luckily for me, my mother was still in good health. And my mother had been, I guess I would say, the godmother of Dad's characters. My mother was my father's first and I would say most astute editor. And so I thought, if she has any problem with me keeping these characters alive without them being in Dad's imagination, I'm not going to do this. So I mentioned it to her and she said, sure, I think that would be a fine idea. Why don't you try it? And then she said, and when you're done, if you'd like me to take a look at it, I would be glad to. So I drafted the first manuscript. It was called Spider Woman's Daughter. And I'll never forget it. It was like the week before Thanksgiving. And so I printed it out on my computer, put all the pages in a box together, numbered them, 1 to 250 or whatever, and took them over to Mom. And then I went home and I said, oh, thank goodness. Now I'm done with this. I can enjoy Thanksgiving, enjoy Christmas. Maybe after the first of the year, I'll hear something from her. So I think it was like a Tuesday I gave it to her. And on Friday, the phone rings, and I'm thinking, oh no, pages are missing, pages are upside down, the ribbon ran out. I didn't know. I mean, I'm thinking there's some technical issue. But instead, Mom says, well, I read your book. I said, oh, and I'm dying to say, what did you think? But before I can even say that, she said, oh, I loved it. And I think your dad would be proud of you. And it's funny. It doesn't, I mean, at that point I was in my 60s, but it did not matter. Hearing your parent say that your other parent would be proud of you is like better than a New York Times bestseller. So anyway, that was kind of the start of what led me to continue my dad's series. So, which now is also my series. So this is my newest book, The Sacred Bridge. And in The Sacred Bridge, I have basically I'm not going to say too much about the plot because I really want you guys to read it and to be surprised. But I can say that there are basically two kind of parallel stories in The Sacred Bridge. One is the Jim Chee story. And in The Sacred Bridge, poor Jim has really been working hard and doing a lot of bureaucratic stuff, which he really hates. So in The Sacred Bridge, I decide it's time for Jim to have a break. So Jim and his wife, Bernadette Manuelito, and Bernie's sister, Darlene, who usually needs some extra support and is a minor character who I created. I'll talk about her in a minute. Anyway, the three of them go to Antelope Canyon and do a beautiful, beautiful hike with a Navajo guide. And then Jim goes on a pilgrimage to a really sacred site near Lake Powell called Rainbow Bridge. He hikes, most people would take a boat, but Jim hikes across country. It's like 4 or 5 days to get to Rainbow Bridge. He kind of makes peace with his inner turmoil. And then because he's at Lake Powell and a boat is coming to pick him up, but the boat won't be there for a while. So he thinks, well, gee, it would be nice to see a little of the lake and maybe I can get down close and take off my hiking boots and soak my feet. So he's walking along looking for a place where he can get down to the water. And as he's walking, he sees something unexpected, which then requires him to take off his hat as spiritual person and put on his hat as crime solver and detective. So that's kind of the nut of the Jim Chee story. Well, meanwhile, Bernie and Darlene, after the vacation, Bernie has to get back to work. So she drives Darlene to where Darlene and their mother live in Toadlena. And then she is heading on to Shiprock, where she lives and where she works. And as she's driving, there's a young man hitchhiking, and he looks very much like Darlene's boyfriend. So Bernie is thinking, what in the world is he doing out here? So she pulls over, thinking that she'll pick him up or at least find out what the story is. And as she gets closer, she realizes that it's not Darlene's boyfriend, that it's another man. And the second thing she realizes is that this guy is absolutely terrified. And so as she has stopped there, she sees him rush across the highway. There is a black sedan speeding toward him. The sedan hits him, and then the sedan backs up over him. So needless to say, Bernie is horrified and angry at this total disregard for human life. So from then on, it becomes her mission to figure out who was this guy, who killed him, and why, and how can we bring these people to justice? So those are sort of the two parallel stories that drive The Sacred Bridge. One thing that always inspires my writing, and I guess I would say where I start when I'm starting a new novel, is with the setting. So with Rainbow Bridge, I thought, well, I had never been to Antelope Canyon, and I always wanted to go there. So I think, well, I'd seen pictures of it. It's absolutely fabulous. It's on Navajo land in Arizona. It's lots of beautiful sandstone. It's gorgeous. So and not only that, but it's full of twists and turns and steep spots. And I thought this would be a really great place to hide a dead body. So I decided I want the opening scene to be there. But unfortunately, right around the time I'm working on this book, the pandemic hits in full force. And so the Navajo Nation, the Navajo president and the council, in their wisdom, closed down the Navajo Nation to all outsiders like me. So I think, well, that's okay. I can work on the Bernadette Manuelito story, which is set near Shiprock, where I've been many times before. And I'll just wait. And when Antelope Canyon opens, surely this pandemic won't be around forever. When Antelope Canyon opens, I'll visit it, and then I can write that part of the book. Well, as you know, that just didn't happen. I mean, now the Navajo Nation is open finally, but it did not happen in the time for my deadline to submit the manuscript for Sacred Bridge. So eventually, and meanwhile, my editor is tapping her virtual wristwatch and saying, the deadline is coming. You got to get going on this. So I decide I'm going to change my opening chapter. And actually, I think it worked out better. So it was like the pandemic kind of gave me a gift in disguise. I just finally had a chance to see Antelope Canyon about a month ago, and it really is spectacular. So if any of you have not gone, I highly, highly recommend it. And so anyway, that was one of my settings. Luckily, I had seen Rainbow Bridge and I had been to Lake Powell. Lake Powell borders on the Navajo Nation. There is a Navajo community called the Navajo Mountain Chapter. And so some of Sacred Bridge is set there. And another thing that the Jim Chee story involves, and this ties into the character with whom my dad began this series back in 1970. This ties into Joe Leaphorn. Joe Leaphorn, on one of his very first cases, had been to this area, and he had discovered a cave that had a wonderful and sacred collection of sand paintings that would be used in healing ceremonies. And he's wondering, as the water levels in Lake Powell have risen and then have sunk again, what happened to these paintings? Are they still there? And he's thinking, if they are there, the Navajo Nation should do something to preserve them, because they were really special, special, special. I mean, he hasn't seen them for 25 years, but he remembers them very strongly. So he suggests to Jim, as long as he's going to Lake Powell on his pilgrimage to the Sacred Bridge, that perhaps he look for this cave. So meanwhile, the Bernadette Manuelito story also was complicated by the pandemic. That story involves cannabis. And New Mexico, the state where I live, when I was working on this book, there was much discussion about legalizing recreational, or what they were calling adult use marijuana. And many of the growers were highly in favor and doing big public information campaigns. So I contacted a few and I said, I'm working on this book and one of the settings involves cannabis, and I would love to come and, see your operation. And they said, oh, we would love that. We would love to have some good publicity. But, it's the pandemic and we can't have anybody in here. All of our workers have to sign waivers and wear masks and blah, blah, blah. So I thought, well, this is interesting. So, but they were very forthcoming with information about how the whole operation worked. And they sent me videos. So again, I was able to use my imagination and facts and kind of put that together. So that's sort of the story, the settings that are involved in the Sacred Bridge. I wanted to say one more little thing about research. When I switched from nonfiction to fiction, I really didn't understand how much research fiction involves. And I know as a reader, when I'm reading a novel, I love, besides being entertained, besides being swept away by the power of the characters and the interest of the story, I really like to learn something in the process too, to come across some idea that I hadn't thought of, or some fact of history, some maybe a sideline of science that I didn't know. So in Sacred Bridge, one of my main characters is an archaeologist who worked in Glen Canyon before Lake Powell was, when Lake Powell was on the drawing board. There was a program called Salvage Archaeology. And the idea was to gather as much information as possible about the early Pueblo and Paiute and Ute and Navajo, the early sites of people who lived in this area. So when the water rose and many artifacts might be washed away or destroyed, at least there would be some record of what had been there. So one of my main characters is an archaeologist who worked on that project. So I enjoyed so much doing that research, learning about what Glen Canyon had been like before Lake Powell, some of the arguments pro and con about Lake Powell, and then these archaeologists who spent so much time doing that hard work with the clock ticking on knowing they would have to leave, so they wouldn't drown. And one really interesting thing I found out was that almost all of those archaeologists were men, even though there were a lot of women in archaeology. And the two universities ran those studies. And there was a big bias in the 1960s against women in archaeology. But the University of New Mexico had two, what can I say? Bulldog, I guess, women archaeologists. They were really strong about wanting to be part of this research. So they sort of weaseled their way in. And then when the men on the crew started complaining that their long hair was getting in the artifacts, they went out and got a buzz cutter and just shaved off their hair so they could still work without causing too much trouble. So I'm not that they were causing trouble, but anyway, so they could get rid of that objection. So I'm using up my time here, but I wanted to read you just one little excerpt. This is from the Jim Chee part of the story, and this is only on page 14, so I'm not giving too much away. Oh, before I do this, speaking of readers, if any of you like audiobooks, I have a wonderful woman reader for the audiobook of The Sacred Bridge. She is the daughter of Wes Studi, who was the actor who played Joe Leaphorn in movies that PBS made of three of my dad's books many years ago. And her language consultant, to make sure that she pronounces the Navajo words correctly, is Peter McDonald, who was a former president of the Navajo Nation. So I was delighted to have those people on my team, and the audiobook is really good. But I'm not an audiobook, but I'm going to read you just this little excerpt, and then I'd be happy to answer any questions that you all might have. Okay. So Jim Chee, he's done with Rainbow Bridge, and now he's trying to figure out how to get down to the water. Okay. He scanned the terrain again, hoping for an easier path to soak his toes for a few moments. As far as he could tell, only lizards and birds could get to the water without a struggle. As someone had said of Rainbow Bridge, the best access here was by boat. Thinking of boats reminded him of his own marine pickup. He gave the hunt for a better trail a final try. This time, he observed something yellow bobbing in the water. It looked like cloth trapped against a cream-colored rock face and a large boulder. Probably an item that washed overboard from one of the houseboats. It spoiled the pristine view. It bothered him. Chee watched the fabric sway with the lake's motion, wondering why it had wedged there instead of washing onto the beach or sinking into the depths of the lake. A puzzle. He squinted toward the water and noticed something dark and alive with a dancing motion near the patch of yellow. It reminded him of the anemones he and Bernie had seen on their honeymoon in Hawaii. As he watched the dance, he realized he wasn't observing a marine creature. He felt his stomach tighten with anticipation. So I hope when people read that, they'll decide they need to read the next chapter. Thank you all so much for your attention. I am really honored that Mystery Galaxy invited me tonight to talk about my new baby. And if you have any questions, I would be delighted to answer them for you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I've got some questions.
Great.
If you don't mind. So we talked a little bit before the show about whodunits and your love for them. what were some of the influences besides your dad for how you think about mysteries and building the suspense there?
Oh, I love Michael Connelly. I think I probably some of the very first mysteries I read were Michael Connelly, John Grisham. Gosh, I love J.A. Jantz. I don't know, she lives in Arizona and in Seattle. She writes 3 mystery series. And I think that is so smart. I mean, here I am writing 1 mystery series with 3 characters. So each book I have to come up with 3 different plot lines, where she just like has, 1 plot line for this guy, another series for this guy, another series for this guy. When I was growing up, I read Nancy Drew. I love mysteries. Yeah. I mean, I'm sure if I sat here, I love C.J. Box, Craig Johnson. Oh my goodness. My brain is going blank. If it's a well-written mystery, I probably would like it. I'm not so much for the cheese shop, the dog grooming mysteries, those sort of cozy mysteries. Yeah, I like more mysteries that have maybe at least 1 dead person in them, and yeah, not too much gruesome stuff though. But I like good suspense. I like thinking I have figured it out, and then at the end realizing, no, I was wrong.
You need an appropriate amount of dead bodies in your mystery.
Yeah.
So how do you build that into your novels? The suspense, it's always something that fascinates me as a reader, to think how did this author get me to this point? Like you said, you lead them to the conclusion, and then you pull the rug out, and then everything, when you think back on it, still makes sense for that second conclusion. So how do you build that? Do you start with the ending and try to figure it out backwards? Do you go logically in chronological order?
Yeah, I try to go in chronological order. I start out thinking I'm going to go in chronological order, and then I get to about chapter 6, and I realize, for chapter 7 to work, I need to go back and put something in chapter 2, so it kind of makes sense. But I try to write through it all from beginning to end. And if I think of that stuff I should have put in chapter 2, instead of going back and writing it and then rewriting chapter 2, I just put it there in chapter 5 or whatever, and say, go back and be sure that this person is driving a sedan that has a noisy muffler, or whatever the clue was. And the other thing, usually I write it, I will try to write the book through all the way to the end. And then when I go back to read it, I almost always have to take out description in some places because it's slowing down the progress of the story. And then maybe add some in some places, or add some emotional reaction, just to kind of give the reader readers a chance to catch their breath. So, it's hard to say. It's a lot of it with me is I guess more intuitive than, saying this is the outline of how I do it. I just kind of, I guess, get a feeling for how it seems to me the story is progressing. In Sacred Bridge, things worked out pretty well. But in the book before, Stargazer, I was like 75% done with it. And I realized that the guy who I thought was the villain was not the villain. And so I had to, luckily, there was another character who'd been whispering in my ear saying, I'm not who you think I am, take another look. And I was just kind of ignoring this. But when I realized that villain number 1 was too nice, then I went back and made villain number 2 villain number 1. And actually, I think if it fooled me, maybe it fooled some readers too. So even though it kind of made my heart beat fast, in the end, I was glad that had happened, because I think it made the book better.
So you're what people call a pantser, right? You write by the seat of your pants and go with where the characters take you.
Yeah, I would say I'm more like a gardener, because before I start, I have an idea. Like, when you're doing a garden, you do the walls and you put in the drip system. I know what the setting's going to be. I know who the main crime solver is going to be. I usually have an idea of what the crime is going to be, because that sort of is a reflection of the setting. So I have those elements in place. And then comes all of the, you find some plants that you think are going to do well in the sun, but they get too hot there, so you have to pull them up. And then you find some plants that need water, but they're too close to the drip and they drown. All of that, all those details then. So I guess I'm kind of a hybrid myself of part plotter and part pantser. I could never, though, write an outline starting with the title and going down to chapter 38. But I do, before I start, I do write a letter to myself. And I kind of say, this is what this book should be, what I would like this book to be about. And these are the themes, and these are the main characters. And at the end, I hope that I can say, this happened and this happened and this happened. And so if I get to a point where I'm kind of in a cul-de-sac and I can't figure out how to get out of it, if I look at that letter again, often it will give me a few clues on where to go.
I love
Did that answer that question? It was kind of a rambling circular answer.
I've never heard of it described as a gardener, and I think that's a really poetic way to describe your process. And I think that the letter to yourself is a great mechanism to keep you on track without constraining you.
Yeah. And when you're doing a garden, you may have something like some native plant that comes up that's really pretty, but it's just in the wrong spot. And that happens when you're writing too. I might come up with a beautiful description or some kind of really heartfelt encounter between two characters. But if it doesn't move the plot along, it has to go in that special save for later folder.
Do you have a lot of stuff in that folder, and have you been able to bring any of it back?
No, I never look at it.
It's nice to know it's there, though, just in case.
It's easier than hitting the delete key, though.
Yeah. You feel attached to it, but you don't want to use it, so you don't want to offend the work, and just put it away.
That's right. You don't want the muse to give up on you. And you never know. I mean, people have asked me to write short stories, and I haven't. I've just been so busy with novels, I haven't had time to do that. But I'm thinking maybe some of these snippets might turn into short stories. So I'm glad that I have them.
They'd be like short story mysteries.
Probably, yeah.
Cool. Short stories is such a great different experience for mysteries. There's you just have to manage the whodunit element a lot differently.
Well, they're tight. I mean, you can't have as many. You don't have any subplots in a short story. It all has to just be on that railroad track going straight down. So I'm kind of looking forward to it. I think it would be a nice challenge.
Yeah.
But I have to wait till I get done with the book I'm working on now, and who knows? But maybe I think I would enjoy it.
I usually leave that question to the end, but since you brought it up, can you tell us a little bit about book number 8 and maybe a title if you have it or anything?
I don't have a title. Titles are tough for me. I mean, it was I had a hard time with the title for Sacred Bridge because I knew I really wanted the word bridge in the title. And somebody said, well, just call it Rainbow Bridge because, Rainbow Bridge is the name of the sacred arc. But the first thing I thought of, people talk about dead pets, they go across the Rainbow Bridge and then, there's flowers and balloons, and that's not a good title for a mystery. So no. But anyway, I liked bridge for this book. Because if you think of a bridge, it's like a connection maybe between something familiar and something new, or from a place where there's, say, hesitation or unrest back to where you're safer. Bridges can go either way. And often, a bridge is across a roaring river or a freeway or, something dangerous. So I liked that idea of a bridge's transition because almost all the characters in this book are in transition. So it kind of, worked for me that way. So the book I'm working on now is going to be set in the Bears Ears area of Utah, which is on the very northern end of there's the northern end of the Navajo Reservation, and then there's the Bears Ears National Park. And I'm using some elements of paleontology in the story. So I'm learning a lot about dinosaurs and dinosaur tracks and dinosaur teeth and feathers, and it's really so much fun, but I have to remind myself I'm not writing a book about dinosaurs. I'm writing a mystery, but I'm supposed to have it finished in July. And I think I'm going to make it. I just sort of need to write it through to the very end and then start pruning out a lot of the dinosaur stuff. It's going to go in one of those special files.
Well, they've discovered a lot of big, dinosaur remains there, right? That's that area.
Right. Right. A lot of dinosaurs that have not been discovered anywhere else in the world. And a lot of dinosaurs and a lot of pre-dinosaurs that seem to have information about how living creatures dealt with climate change a gazillion years ago. So it's really, really interesting. So the idea of wrapping this into a mystery is giving me a challenge, but I'm enjoying it.
My gut says that a paleontologist might be in danger in this next book.
Oh, you must have read a mystery or two.
Only one or two. Listen, we have a comment and a question here from Nancy. Nancy loves all of the mystery authors you've talked about and loves the descriptions that your dad portrayed of Arizona and New Mexico and inspired her to travel. And Nancy was wondering, do you plan to continue the stories of Joe, Leaphorn, Jim Chee, and Bernie Manuelito? And I think the answer to that is yes.
I hope so. I really hope so. The book that I'm working on now is the last book on my current contract. So I'm going to, be negotiating again. But I think because these books have done well and because I'm still enjoying them, that there should not be a problem with them. So yeah, I hope so.
Keep hitting the New York Times bestseller list and that.
I hope so. Yeah. It'd be great.
Let's see. You talked a little bit about research, and one question I always love to ask mystery writers and thriller writers is there anything that you had to research for this book that if the police or the FBI saw you researching, that they might have some questions for you?
They might have a lot of questions about all of my cannabis research. I mean, now that New Mexico has legalized it, it's a whole other issue. One thing that when I was doing that research, I didn't want Sacred Bridge to just be another drugs are evil book. So I did a lot of research about medical marijuana and about different cannabis hybrids that are being used to treat rare diseases, like diseases that really so few people have them that big pharma is not interested in it because it would just cost too much money to come up with something for such a small market. And that was really, really interesting to me. And then, I did a lot of research about drowning, and what effect, and how if you could tell, like an accidental drowning from a drowning that had resulted from, say a head injury, or I can't tell you too much about this, but I think, I have to keep my nose clean for a while. If somebody was looking at my computer records, they might be a little suspicious.
It's always so interesting to hear, without giving away spoilers, what y'all are into researching. Get some like the niche area.
And also I just also like starting fires, what kind of accelerants work the best, and if you're starting a grass fire versus a fire where you have, say, a log pile, and all that stuff might get me in trouble.
Yeah, that would raise some red flags, I'm sure. Especially during fire season here. I assume you guys have fire season, not to the extent that California does, but
oh gosh, New Mexico is having a terrible, terrible fire season this year. Yeah. We've had 6 days of 40-mile-an-hour winds. It's been awful. I've never really seen it this. Yeah, bad. But not like California, because it's not such a populous state.
Yeah. Nancy would also like to know whether you'll be doing any live book tours for this or your next book. And I know you said you are and have done some. So if you want to share where people can find you if they're out in your neck of the woods.
Oh, well, sure. Thanks for that question. I'm going tomorrow. I'm doing a live event at a retirement center in Santa Fe. And then I'm going up to Durango to do a little talk at an independent bookstore there. And then I'm going to the Farmington, New Mexico library to do a talk there. And then I'm going to Tucson, and I'm going to do a talk for the benefit the Friends of the Pima County Public Library. And then I'm doing a talk at a Barnes and Noble. And then I'm coming back to Santa Fe. Santa Fe is starting the Santa Fe Literary Festival in May. It's going to be 3 days in May. They're bringing in all kinds of wonderful authors, and they're honoring my dad as a New Mexico legend or something like that. And so they asked me if I would talk about Dad, and there's a gentleman who's written a biography of Dad, and he's going to be on the panel. And after that, I probably do have some other live events, but I can't remember what they are. And for the next book, I'm hoping, I love doing live events. I mean, I love doing Zooms too, because I can just sit here with my jeans on under, I don't have to change my shoes or, drive anywhere. But I love live events because there's such an energy exchange with a live audience. It really, and afterwards, often people will come up and, share ideas with me that sometimes make their ways into my books. So yeah, I'm hoping for the next book that I will be doing some good, big live events. So thanks for that question. Maybe I'll see you there.
Yeah. Let's see. The last question I always like to ask is, what are you reading right now, or what would you recommend if you're? Some authors I know when they're writing don't like to read other people's work, so I respect that.
I have been reading a lot of research material on paleontology, like I said, and then also books on Navajo sacred sites. There's a writer called Robert McPherson, who is he taught at Diné College up in Sali. And he's really a good writer, and they're wonderful stories. So that's mostly what I've been reading. I do like to read fiction, but lately I've been so involved researching this book, I haven't been reading as much fiction as I would like to. However, I have to say, for some reason, I had never read Lee Child. And my partner has a lot of Lee Child books, and I picked one up, and my gosh, those are really thrilling and suspenseful, and I'm enjoying them a lot. And amazingly, the one I picked up has a lot of it is set in winter, and the book I'm working on now also is set in winter. So I might have to steal a few ideas from Lee. Don't tell him.
I will. I mean, that is a huge, body of work to dip your toe into with, child and
should keep me busy for a year at least.
Yes. If you didn't tackle that during the pandemic, like missed opportunity maybe, but. I
love Craig Johnson and C.J. Box. Those, wonderful writers who write about the West.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a lot of good mystery set in the West and not just California.
Right.
All right. Well, that is all the questions that I have. And I think we've gotten through all the audience questions. So I just want to thank Anne and our audience for joining us tonight here at Mysterious Galaxy. And if you haven't already, like I said, you can get the Sacred Bridge from Mysterious Galaxy with a signed book plate. And you can get that at the little button right there. And yeah, otherwise, hopefully we'll see you soon, and maybe on a national book tour for book number 8.
That would be great. I'd love that.
Yeah. Again, thank you for everyone who came out, and I will say goodnight.
Thank you all so much. Thank you for the opportunity, Matt. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, it was a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night, everyone.